Hi everybody, Martha Hall Kelly here. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about my new novel, Sunflower Sisters. I'll miss going out on book tour this year, but at least I can still come to you from my home and connect with readers around the world. You may be familiar with my first two books about the Woolsey Faraday family, Lilac Girls and Lost Roses. I thought I'd share a bit about the research and historical inspiration behind those novels and how they paved the way for Sunflower Sisters. I first learned of a fascinating woman named Caroline Faraday in 1999 when I read an article in Victorian magazine about her famous gardens. The article showed photos of Caroline's home in Connecticut, now known as the Bellamy Faraday House, and photos of her renowned garden, filled with roses and lilacs. I love lilacs and really wanted to visit, but with 3 young children, I had little time to spare. But one Mother's Day, my husband Michael urged me to go, and I visited the estate, unaware that the trip would lead to my first novel. I was the only visitor on the tour of the lovely old home that spring day. During the tour, I came upon Caroline's desk, and a photograph of a group of young women caught my eye. The guide referred to them as the Rabbits and told me that Caroline took up the cause of these young Polish girls after they were experimented upon by the Nazis at Ravensbrück concentration camp. She brought them to America for rehabilitation, and once I heard their story, I was fascinated and set out to learn everything I could about them. My goal was to write a fictionalized account of actual events and to perhaps breathe new life into a story that seemed to me had fallen from public view. I started my research at the Bellamy Faraday House and then traveled to Paris, where I found another archive of Caroline's letters to immerse myself in. In Poland, I was lucky enough to interview a Ravensbrück survivor and took the train to Germany to see the concentration camp. That's a day I'll never forget, girls. I came to love Caroline Faraday's mother, Eliza Woolsey Mitchell. The daughter of one of the famous Woolsey women of New York City, known for being staunch abolitionists and philanthropists, Eliza ended up devoting her time to the cause of white Russian emigres, former aristocrats in Russia who lost everything when the Bolsheviks seized power from the Tsar in 1918. When the emigres arrived in New York City, many of them destitute and traumatized, Eliza helped the women find work and a place to live. She even opened her own apartment and Southampton cottage to them. I began to embark on a new journey that inspired the story of Lost Roses. I created a wall with the other characters I wanted to add, Eliza's aristocratic Russian friend Sophia and a Russian peasant girl, Marinka. To bring the story alive for readers, I traveled to Russia and explored everything from the Tsar's palaces to rustic villages. I visited Long Island, New York, and peeked past the privacy hedges of Southampton's Gin Lane into the famous shingle-style cottages and estates. And in France, I discovered a lovely, little-known Russian part of Paris. But the place I drew the most inspiration from was again the Bellamy Faraday House. From the archives there, I used Eliza's and Caroline's letters and other personal writing to bring this story to light. This incredible family wouldn't let me go after 2 novels, so I traveled further back in time to the Civil War to tell the story of Caroline's great aunt and how she fought to be a nurse on the battlefields of the war for the North and to be part of the fight against slavery. That's how Sunflower Sisters was born. It's told from Georgiana Woolsey's point of view, and also from the points of view of 2 fictitious characters, Gemma, a young woman enslaved on a tobacco plantation, and Anne May, the mistress of that plantation. Many of the historical events in the book are drawn from the Woolsey family letters in the archives at Caroline's house. One letter, which described the sisters seeing a slave market in Charleston, a site that set them on their path to abolitionism, sent me to South Carolina to start my research journey to see the market they described, now a museum. Luckily, I lived in Atlanta at the time, near the Atlanta History Center, with an extensive collection of Civil War artifacts, where they shared their deep knowledge of everyday life during the war. I also visited former plantations, now museums, every chance I got, in the surrounding area. Since Sunflower Sisters is set in Maryland, a border state, Sauterley Plantation was especially inspiring, on the banks of the Patuxent River. A key part of Sunflower Sisters takes place in Gettysburg on the battlefield, so I spent a lot of time there, tracing the steps of the characters so I could write about the place as accurately as possible. My son, who I dedicated the book to, came with me on those trips and helped me document my research. Gettysburg is such an incredibly moving place, and it was helpful to visit the actual sites of scenes in the book. The field hospital where Georgie and her mother, Jane Eliza, actually nursed soldiers, Union and Confederate alike, to the train station where the wounded were sent off in cattle cars, to the hallowed ground where Gemma gets caught up in battle. Caroline Faraday was a staunch supporter of civil rights. I think she'd be happy to know that her abolitionist Woolsey ancestors' stories are being told. It's been bittersweet writing Sunflower Sisters, the last in a series of books about Caroline Faraday's incredible family. But whenever I miss these characters, I know where I can find them. In the pages of Lilac Girls, Lost Roses, and now Sunflower Sisters. And I hope you will too.
That was wonderful. I'd like to introduce Martha Hall Kelly. She is the New York Times bestselling author of 3 books. Her debut novel, international blockbuster Lilac Girls, and the prequels, Lost Roses and Sunflower Sisters. And yes, never an enthusiastic history student at school, Martha developed a passion for it when she discovered the long-buried story of how Caroline Faraday, a New York socialite and philanthropist, who championed the cause of a group of Polish women nicknamed the Rabbits and experimented upon Nazi doctors at all-female Ravensbrück concentration camp. Martha's a former copywriter and lives on a hay farm in Litchfield County, Connecticut with her husband, Michael. Their practically human dog, Oliver, 2 beavers, several muskrats. She has journalism degrees from Syracuse and Northwestern universities, and her books have been published in 49 languages. Her latest novel, Sunflower Sisters, the story of Caroline Faraday's great aunt, fight to become a nurse during the Civil War and the family's fight against slavery, is described by Kirkus as having, quote, historical vermicitude worthy of a Ken Burns documentary, but oh, so much more lurid, close quote. And once she looked up from the actual definition of lurid, was very happy. She currently is working on 2 new books, a Cold War novel set in the 1950s, super scary, contemporary thriller set in her own house, which makes it very hard to sleep some nights. Now that I've butchered your bio, I welcome you, Martha. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. I do have several questions. First of all, I have read your book and I absolutely love it. And just bravo to you for being number 10 on the New York Times bestseller list. That is just what a wonderful debut. So I'm very, very happy for you for this. It's a very big deal.
It's hard these days with with a lot of the major bookstores closed. I mean, you're doing an amazing job, but not everybody is able, to do what you do. So,
we have a wonderful community, and one of the benefits of Zoom is we have people here from Athens, Georgia, Maryland, all over the country that have come here because they want to hear more about your book, or they're members of the Bethel area and they want to be part of it. So thank you for that. The first question I have for you is most Civil War history, and I know you've done quite a bit of research on the era surrounding this book. Most Civil War history seems to be focused on men in our history books, particularly men's acquisition of land through war. This was from a woman's point of view. Was there trouble finding women's history other than the Faraday house because of their notes?
A little bit, to be honest. Yeah, but that's a big reason why I wrote it, because, someone once asked me at an event, when are you going to write about men? And guess what? It was a man asking. And I said, never. I'm 63. I'm at the point now where I have, limited number of books that I have time in my life. And there are so many women's stories that deserve to be told. And for years, decades, centuries, men have been telling their own stories. So now it's time. And I just think it's interesting because so many of those stories are just hidden. Like with Lilac Girls, if I hadn't walked into the Bellamy Faraday house, I think that that story would still be, sleeping there. And so, but yes, to answer your question, especially from the enslaved part of it, there were more male stories written from the point of view of enslaved people. Although I found a couple of really, really helpful, inspiring ones, but also from the point of view, like I had all those letters that were in the basement of the Bellamy Faraday house in archival boxes, thanks to Connecticut Landmarks and to Caroline Faraday. So I got just this unbelievable front row seat to what life was really like in those days, because that was their email in a way, their messaging back and forth to each other. And so, but if I hadn't had that, it would have been a lot harder. I think Ken Burns does a great job with his documentaries, kind of unearthing people to talk about. Mary Chestnut is one person that he gets a point of view from. But back then, I have the one book that Georgie wrote, and that it's called 3 Weeks at Gettysburg. It is a tiny little book, but she wasn't really allowed to promote that book very much. And it just wasn't accepted by society to be a woman and put your name on a book. So unfortunately, for that reason, everything was written by men.
You lead me right into my next question, because the point that I was going to ask you about was the Woolsey sisters all seemed to be extremely well educated. Was that unusual for their time? And slaves were not allowed to be taught to read. So to educate a slave was almost a punishable offense, because they felt that slaves might possibly, for a lot of reasons, that they might run away, or that they shouldn't be educated, or men didn't want women to be educated. And so I just kind of wanted you to speak to not only just the books that were written and some of the literary references in the book, but the disparity between the two.
The disparity between
the Woolsey sisters, and for instance, Gemma's ability to read.
Okay.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was really surprised by the level of education that the women had, because in all the letters, it was like an excavation reading those letters, because you pick up little bits, someone went to Italy, someone just got back from France, they traveled so much. And then I picked up a lot of pieces. They would talk about their educations. For example, Caroline's grandmother, Carrie, who was the youngest daughter of Jane Eliza, she was unbelievably well educated. And they all went to the same schools up in Massachusetts. Not that dissimilar to the Alcotts. They were really well educated. And I think it's Georgie at one point in one of the letters says, the teacher or the headmaster of the school contacted her mother and said, the girls really can't come to school there anymore because they've given away all the prizes. They've won all the prizes for being so smart. So that was unusual at the time. I have to be honest, even today when I was growing up, I had a friend of the family who sent their sons to private school, but their daughters to public school, because they didn't feel like they should spend money on their daughter's education. So it's not, it's still alive today.
Wow.
That, that same kind of bias. And meanwhile, in the book, Gemma has been taught to read and write by her former mistress, Aunt Tandy Rose. And Aunt Tandy Rose was a selfish old lady. I think, in her way, she loved, these human beings that she owned, which is such a bizarre thing to even talk about. But she taught Gemma, who was a house slave, to read and write for her own benefit, so that Gemma would read her the Bible and write her grocery list for her and read her racy novels. So that's the only reason that Gemma could read and write. But it's a real benefit for Gemma, because Gemma's really smart, even though the next mistress, once Aunt Tandy Rose dies, she leaves the plantation to Anne May Peeler, or Anne May Wilson Watson, but Anne May is not as smart as Gemma, and she doesn't know how to write. So Gemma gets into some trouble when Anne May makes her write some things, and there's kind of a traitorous, there's some sedition involved. But one thing that Gemma does say that kind of circles back to what you're saying is, she tells her friend Celeste, books change you. When you learn to read, just be careful because you're going to change. And I think that that's kind of a theme of the book. Once Gemma starts reading and writing, it gets very dangerous for her.
Well, speaking of books, Georgie's not the only one who published. It was
Are you talking about Mary?
Mary.
Oh, Mary. Mary's one of my favorite characters. You get favorites. It's funny. Do you want to see the pictures of the sisters?
Of course.
I have.
Because, oh, by the way, I had to write them down until I had to write them down because there were so many sisters until I figured out that you had them on your website in a wonderful graphic. So if you haven't started the book, ladies and gentlemen, go to the website and you'll see this wonderful graphic that'll explain. It's in the very back of the book. It'll explain the hierarchy, but it's also on the website in color.
It does help. And I had to do the same thing. But this is the early reader copy that I think you had, Alice. And in the hardcover doesn't have pictures, but so this, if I make it very small, is Jane Eliza. She's the matriarch of the family. She is all things good that kind of came down to Caroline Faraday, how she was such an incredible philanthropist and an advocate for civil rights. It all came from Jane Eliza. Jane grew up on a slaveholding plantation in Virginia and always hated slavery. So she raised her children to be strong abolitionists. Here is Charles Woolsey, the father. Love match. They met each other in New York City on the street. They walked by each other and it was just love at first sight. And so sadly, when the 7 daughters were very young, Mr. Woolsey was coming back from New York on a steamship to New Bedford, where they lived up in Massachusetts. And the ship caught fire and only 4 people lived and he wasn't one of them. They say that he helped everybody else try to get them to safety and he died himself, which is very much in character for Mr. Woolsey. So that was just, Jane Eliza was a very strong woman, but that just brought her to her knees. She was pregnant at the time with her 8th child, who I'll show you in one second. But so her oldest daughter is Abby. She, her sisters used to tease her because Abby only had one dress. I mean, it's not like they were super wealthy, but they certainly could afford for her to have more than one dress. And, but she today, I think, would have been a CEO of a corporation or something. She was just really organized. She kept their home at 8 Brevoort Place in New York City. They moved to New York City after their father's death. She kept things humming and was a big part of the Union War effort. This is Jane. Jane and Abby were best friends. And Jane, on the other hand, had very beautiful red hair, and she dressed, so she was what today we would call a clothes horse, I think. She loved her clothes and jewelry and accessories. And she became a nurse in the Civil War. And the woman that you're talking about, Alice, is Mary. I loved Mary. I would have made her the focal point character if I hadn't loved Georgie even more. But Mary had 4 children during the Civil War with her husband, Robert Howland, who was a pastor, and she wrote poetry. And today we would say she went viral because every soldier, North and South, in their pocket carried her poem, which was called A Rainy Day at Camp. And it talked about a soldier thinking about what would happen if he died in battle. And it's a really beautiful poem. And she wasn't allowed to say that she was the author of it because everyone assumed it was a man that wrote it because women didn't do that kind of thing. So she, even by the time she died, the family was not allowed to say that she was the author of Rainy Day at Camp, or Winslow Homer was inspired by her poem to paint this unbelievable painting. still no one was allowed to say that it was Mary's poetry. This is Eliza. Now, Eliza was Georgie, the focal point character in my book, her best friend, her little sister. And she married a very wealthy man, also named Howland, their cousin. Back in those days, they married their cousins. And Joe Howland was this fair-haired, handsome man that joined the military and marched off to war. So she and Georgie cooked up a plan that they would try to become nurses and follow him and take care of him. But for Georgie, this is Georgie, the focal point character, it was more, being a nurse was more about, she had always, since her father died, wished that she could have saved him. And I think in a way, that's what she was doing by being a nurse, helping save other people. This is Hattie, that was Mrs. Woolsey's best friend. They all kind of paired off. And then this is Carrie. This is Caroline Faraday's grandmother and the youngest sister of the group. Brilliant. I mean, unbelievable student. And she did a lot of volunteer work, but I think she felt, being the youngest, that she was kind of left behind. And this is Charles, the baby that was born after Mr. Woolsey passed away. He did yearn for a son, and he finally had it, but unfortunately he was gone by the time Charlie showed up. Charlie was at Appomattox when
Oh my.
at the end of the war, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, so that's the family. And yes, Mary, that answers your question about Mary.
Tell me about nursing at that time, because you include so many details about the fact that men were predominantly nurses, and that just how to care for people on a battlefield. They had to, the prep work about making bandages and wrapping wounds and what they did to treat people, and the differences between what the Woolsey family knew what to do and what Gemma knew what to do in terms of caretaking, which was very different in slave quarters, because they knew how to use nature more often. So I would really love to hear more about that.
That's a really interesting question. No one's asked me that. I think this
Oh, good.
I'm into like almost week 3, and no one's asked me that. It's a great question. Well, first of all, I was so surprised by a lot of the nursing stuff. I didn't realize back then that nurses if you got sick and went to a hospital, the nurses that took care of you, if they were female, came from the prisons. They let women out. Yes, they let them out to be nurses. And because, you're setting yourself up for disease, smallpox, typhoid fever. I mean, it was not a good thing. So when Georgie wants to go off and sign up with Elizabeth Blackwell, the first female doctor, and become a nurse, her mother's like, "Are you kidding?" And her sisters are like laughing, saying, "There's no way." So the Sanitary Commission is headed up by Frederick Olmsted, who designed and created Central Park, headed up the Sanitary Commission. And so she becomes good friends with him. And I can't tell you exactly how it happens, because it's kind of fun how she was not eligible to be a nurse, but she, tries her best to do that. But yeah, at the time, mostly it was all male nurses at the battles. So, and if your husband or someone in your family, a man, of course, was hurt in battle, you went down and took care of them. I didn't realize that either. So wow. They had these floods, a huge influx of family members, moms and sisters and wives going down to the battlefield in these hospital tents, trying to take care of the wounded. So the doctors got used to really not liking that. And there was a lot of male-female tension, and the male nurses felt threatened. And so by the time the Sanitary Commission nurses come, the professionals who have been taught by Elizabeth Blackwell, they really feel threatened, because those male nurses, if the female nurses come in and take their jobs, they have to go to battle. and they had a pretty cushy life. They could, drink the medicinal brandy and hang out on the hospital ships and, do some manual labor, but it was nothing like going to battle. So they actively were nasty to the nurses, and so were the doctors. Really, really bad. You would think that they would be so grateful to have the help, but a lot of the surgeons, especially, were alcoholics, and they had to do a lot of amputations. It was a very difficult job. Meanwhile, Gemma, the enslaved people at the time had a whole different idea about medicine. In the book, Dr. Frank Bacon, who's one of the doctors on the battlefield, the good guys, he had studied in France. And so he understood about germs, it's at the very beginning of that. And he has a slightly different point of view, but most of the non-enslaved people in the book, if you got sick, it was like, okay, let's start praying. So, but to Gemma, it's really interesting. Her grandmother, not her blood grandmother, Sally Smith, she has a garden that has all sorts of, slave remedies in it, devil's dung, all sorts of wonderful names. And they really used it to, and there's one of my favorite scenes in the book is something bad happens to a friend of Gemma's, and they do everything they can with their own medicine, but it just can't save her. So they really had, and there's another scene in the book where Gemma uses that medicine to really pull off a miracle practically. And I think it's ironic in a way that her medicine is more powerful than what they had, in the doctor's bag at the camp.
Was there really such a thing as hospital ships?
Oh my God, yes. Everything in it is true in the book, except for the dialogue, but it's all based on the letters. And so many of the letters came from the hospital ships. And at first, that whole part where the tug pushes them down the river. And at first they thought, oh, okay, we are going to, the two sisters, Eliza and Georgie, they thought, okay, we're going to be able to stay close to Joe, who was in Virginia. When you think about it, they were in Washington. Virginia was just, they used to ride out and visit him. And it was very close by. They thought they were going to be able to stay close, but they you had to go where you were assigned. And they ended up having to sail, not all the way up to New York, but what would happen is that the wounded would come onto the ship right there in Washington, and then that ship would go up to the safety of a port, a northern port, and in Rhode Island or Massachusetts, and they would take the wounded to a hospital there. But what happened, they became so good at what they were doing. Frederick Olmsted wouldn't let them go all the way. He kept them. So as soon as the wounded were ready and stabilized, the ship would go, but they had to transfer to another ship and stay right there because he came to depend on them so much. Georgie especially, he actually said, he was quoted as saying that she should have been a general in the war because she was so good. And meanwhile, the doctors are yelling at her and berating her. So it was a really, I think, you had to really have strength of character, and they had that from their mom.
You did quite obviously a great deal of research in this book, and you had to do research in the North and you had to do research in the South. Did you have a difference in how you were welcomed? Or, I know that having gone to high school in Maryland, that there was a difference between Bull Run and Manassas, and yet it was the same battle. And the perspective was completely different from the North than it was from the South. What are your thoughts on that? You really were dealing with both worlds, and you've lived in both worlds.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting living in Atlanta. I wrote Lilac Girls when I was living down there, and I actually started writing this as well when I lived down there. And, in Atlanta now, they still call it, many people do, and they're not kidding, the War of Northern Aggression. And they're not going to tell you, the whole bless your heart thing. They're not going to tell you to your face that, what they really think. So I learned that. So, you know what? I just went about my business and went to the Atlanta History Center, went to all the plantations around there, and just did my research. And nobody ever confronted me about it. And then, of course, in the North, same thing. Yeah, I think when you're researching, you can kind of, go below the whatever, below the radar. And I did find that in the Northern, I'm from Massachusetts, and I've always thought, we're so liberal, and, I'm sure no one had slaves in Massachusetts. So not true. And New York as well. New York especially, there were a lot of merchants, and they weren't crazy about getting rid of slavery because it meant that they had to pay for their workforce, and that was going to cut into their profits. So there were a lot of copperheads, so-called. Anne May is a copperhead in the book because she's from Louisiana, but it's a Southern sympathizer, a snake that's living in the North. And oftentimes they would ask those people to take an oath. And that was it. If you took an oath to say, yes, I support the Union, then you were okay. Which, I don't know. That's very trusting, I think, to just say, okay, we trust you if you say that, if you swear in the Bible.
How did you do research on a slave auction? That is really the launching point for the book.
Yeah, I found the letter. Oh my God. Well, I read so many letters, and you get to know. Also, I did the same thing for Lilac Girls, and I don't know if you remember in Lilac Girls there was a scene where Caroline goes to the April in Paris ball, and she asks the Duchess of Windsor for money for the rabbits, and the Duchess turns her down. And that was from a letter. And I was in Paris with a translator that I found on Craigslist, who gave me a fake name because she was afraid I might be like a grifter or something. Josephine Baker was her name that she gave me in French. And I never even figured it out, but she read me that letter, and she had gotten into it so much. Like, we had spent the day, just her translating letters for me. And we both looked at each other when she read that letter, and we went, oh my God. So the same thing happened to me when I read the letter about the Charleston slave market. And it's just, I have a copy of it. It's just so, oh my God, it's just so sad. It says the sale was in Chalmers Street, a red flag indicating the spot, hardly a stone's throw from the hotel. The slave yard was probably the largest in Charleston, a great empty square. We ladies stood at the gate and looked in. Whole families of all ages were standing back against the walls, being questioned by purchasers and waiting their turn. Among the saddened lookers-on, all colored women except ourselves, was a middle-aged Black woman with a child in her arms. Mother had much talk with her. "Ah, Mrs.," she said, "they leave me some of the little ones. They sell my boys away, but I expect that. And all I wish is that they get a good master and Mrs. There, Mrs., that's one of my boys on the stand now." When I read that, I just thought, it's just so horribly sad. And the fact that the women were talking to the Woolseys were talking to her through the gate, I just thought, I have to start there. And I'm glad I did. Do you like the way that it starts?
Oh, it's impactful. And it really sets the tone for the conflict in the rest of the book. From all three characters, because you're dealing with, looking for a good master, hope, the hope of the slave, it's herself. And the fact that someone's an abolitionist is really just going to do everything she can to get this, to change this.
Right.
Anita mentioned in the chat, speaking of research, wondering if you visited historic Sotterley. And I believe you've talked about having been there and how it relates to Gemma. And I wondered if you could speak to that. Is that the right name? The Sotterley, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I first heard, a friend of mine told me that her ancestors had been enslaved there, and just someone I met at a Lilac Girls event, and when I said I was doing writing a Civil War book, she said, you might want to check out Sutterly, because I was kind of trying to figure out where I wanted to set it. And so I went down there and I just thought, yes, this is perfect. Well, first of all, Maryland was a border state. And so while some of the northern states, they didn't have slavery, it was abolished, slavery was, in the border states, Lincoln was reluctant to say you can't have any more slaves because he was afraid Maryland would secede and go, and that would have been the end of it. Because, you know, when you think about geographically where Maryland is, so close to Washington, it would have been hard to win the war. So they had to be kind of, you know, pussyfoot around that. So that helped me for my story because, you know, to have a state, you know, Sutterly had slaves up until the very end. So that was helpful for the story. And when I went there, they have their slave cabin that they've really, they've kept it so beautifully and renovated it. And it's a big part of the tour because a lot of times you go to some of those former plantations and they kind of give the whole idea of slavery short shrift. And at Sutterly, I think they really take it seriously. But the main house where my fictitious Anne May lives is absolutely beautiful. I mean, you just walk around there and there's just all the detail is still there, and all the outbuildings like the smokehouse, which, you know, is featured so prominently in my book, the tobacco barns, and you can just, you know, kind of picture it when you walk around there. I highly recommend going there because it's really like walking back in time, and you're right there on the shore of the Patuxent River. And the Generous Jenny, one of the first slave ships, used to pull up there and sell slaves off of the deck of the Generous Jenny. So, I mean, it's a very historic place.
One of the quotes that I love from Gemma is "Night was our day."
Uh,
I love that. It really gave me a picture of when they could be themselves.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great that you liked that. Yeah. For them, day was so hard. It started with a bell at, you know, 5 o'clock in the morning, and they were out in the fields, or in Gemma's case, she was in the house. But I mean, that was almost worse. Who's to say what's worse? But and then they worked them until sundown, and that was the only, you know, they were expected to go back and sleep, but they couldn't because they had so much, you know. Gemma's mother and father have a vegetable patch that they need to tend. They have a lot of things that they needed to do. The father made furniture because they were allowed to have some kind of, like Sally Smith makes jellies and jams and is very successful at it and makes a lot of money doing it. So that was the only time that was theirs. And then of course, you know, they also wanted to sleep. So yeah, I'm glad you like that.
Um, Flowers are a huge player in all three of your books. I particularly enjoyed Gemma making flowers for the hats and for
Did you? Oh,
people.
I'm so glad.
It's
I
just
love
wonderful. I love that you know, you even went so far as to talk about the fabric pieces and the sort of linty pieces that you got together to make these flowers. And was that in letters too? I mean, where did that come from? How
You know,
people made things?
I read about the fun. You know, I have to have some fun doing this, and you know, I think
It's
that
okay
was
if you made it up, Martha. I just wanted to
yeah,
know.
it was totally made it. Well, I started researching flower pot bonnets, and I knew that the slaves made flower pot bonnets, and they would actually take a flower pot. And on the cover of the book, I mean, I think, you know, that's kind of a good example of the flower pot bonnet, but they would take an actual flower pot and weave around it with, you know, local reeds and things. And then in Gemma's case, I have her making what she calls trash bonnets. And at first they were just regular flower pot bonnets, but I had some fun with it. I think that's my dream, is to like make bonnets out of found stuff. I would love to do that. But she's an original recycler, and she has to be, because the slaves had nothing. And she made clothes for Anne May, of course. Anne May was always decked out until the war. And she just saved all the little bits and pieces and made these beautiful flowers out of it. And I just thought, what you know, just in terms of symbolism, I thought that was a really nice metaphor.
Well, all three of your books have the title with flowers in it, and they show up periodically through all of them. Just even in your video, you talked about originally going to the Bellamy Faraday house because you wanted to see the lilacs.
Oh yeah. Well, originally I had titled that book "The Rabbits of Ravensbrook," and I didn't know anything about publishing. Yeah, I still kind of don't. And thank God, Random House. I mentioned it to my editor when I was living in Atlanta. I said, "Oh, I can't grow lilacs down here. It's such a a bummer. But they need a really strong winter, a cold winter." And if they survive that, then they bloom. And she said, "That's just like the girls. They have to survive this terrible thing and then they blossom. And why don't we call it lilac girls?" And I, of course, was like, "Oh, no." I took to my bed, they can't change the name. And now, of course, I'm so glad they did. But that set, then I thought, well, with Lost Roses, I need another flower. So that was kind of easy because the Tsarina loved white roses. And then for this book, I thought, I was out on tour for Lost Roses and I was asking people, what do you think? And they would say a daisy or a black-eyed Susan, it was hard. I couldn't, and then I found a little bit of information about the sunflower and what it was a symbol of in the Underground Railroad. And I can't tell you what that is because it's a spoiler for the book, but I said, I have my flower, perfect.
For those of you who have not been to Martha's website, marthahallkelly.com, you can see pictures of the bonnets from the periods and beyond. So please go to her website. Don't forget to do that because there's a lot of backstory that you can just get from the pictures there. So don't miss that one. One of the things that I love about we touched on briefly about the writing that some of your characters do, and Mary's is an actual poem, but you also had poems from Harry. Mary's Taps, is that the same poem that you're talking about?
Taps is another one of Mary's poems. Yeah.
Did you pull that from original
from her
documents?
letters.
But did Frank also write that, or did you write that?
Frank Bacon.
Yeah, Frank had a poem, didn't he? Harry had a poem. Did he not?
No, I don't think Harry had a poem. I think Jubal Smalls did.
I'll find it for you, Martha. You wrote a poem for Harry.
Did I?
Yeah, you did.
Oh, wow.
Because I wrote it I write my notes as I read.
I don't remember Harry's poem.
I'll find it. I swear it's the trivia question of the night, if anybody can find it.
Yikes. That's terrible. I don't remember.
No, I could have gotten it wrong too.
But a lot of the letters in there, most of the letters are taken from the actual letters, just little snippets of them. Yeah, I didn't want to make it too long, the letters, but just a little.
Well, there's the comparison to Ken Burns, because Ken Burns is all original documentation. And how rare that is in our time to have people to go back to the original. I took a course once where you went back and learned Amistad history from newspapers in New Haven.
Oh, wow.
And this is going back and reading things and pulling out the history from actual documents. And it's just it's so rich and so vital. I mean, I wonder if you realize how unusual that is.
No, I don't, but now I do. Now that you've said that, that's really unbelievable. It was like archaeology for me, because I knew a lot about Caroline, but I didn't know that much about these women. And then I started reading that some of the letters were written from Litchfield. I live in Litchfield, the town.
Oh my.
And some of them were written back to Brevoort Place in New York from Litchfield. And I realized they used to come up here and visit their relatives, the Van Winkles. And Caroline talks about them in Lilac Girl. So it's just so weird. I mean, sometimes things happen that you just go, how did that happen?
One of the questions, and this is a question that I have, because as a theater major, we were taught on stage that if you were playing in a crowd on stage, to sound like you were speaking, you were to say the word watermelon, 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 watermelon over again,
No.
because it makes your mouth move as if you're speaking. And for
Yeah, you're
you,
right.
watermelon over again was at a point in the book where they were telling the children that if they didn't know the words to the song, that they were just to sing watermelon with the tune. Where did that come from?
Again, only you ask these amazing questions. I had just come when I was finishing the book, which was really emotional. The other books were sad to write too, but I did not shed this many tears. And my husband often came in and was like, "What is going on with you?" But now that you've finished the book, there's some sad, as my kids say, happy sad in some parts, but it's the end of an era. But my cousin's husband, Wiley Quinn, was the organist down at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I just come from his funeral. And it was, as you can imagine, the choir went all out for him. And it was just the most beautiful thing. And in the eulogy, I can't remember if it was his daughter or someone that talked about how he welcomed her into the choir when she was very young. And she said, I don't know if I know where the words, and he said, "Don't worry, just sing watermelon. And, just people will think that you know the words." So I just put that in as kind of a little, and I loved him. And we were very close to our cousins. And so I just put that in as a little kind of homage to him.
It's a real thing. Oh, that's great.
And
That's
now I
wonderful.
know from you that it is real. That's
And
funny.
that they teach that in theater classes. If you go to Broadway, I bet you now everybody who's going to go to the next Broadway show is going to watch everybody sing watermelon on stage. I bet you anything. Anyway, hoop skirts.
Oh my God.
Now, on your website, you talk about them catching fire.
On my
What I
blog,
didn't
yeah.
realize is that they were also known for being able to allow people to steal things. So can you?
Oh yeah. So funny. That's another thing I didn't really understand. I thought hoops were, I don't know. I guess, you see Scarlett O'Hara and she's got that cage, but it was an actual cage and it was dangerous because if you got somehow your cage got caught on, I don't know, like a horse and carriage going by, many people, women died. And fires were the worst because it was highly flammable. The crinolines were flammable and they would get near. Think about all the fires and the candles and things. So many women, hundreds of thousands of women died from wearing hoops, but it was such a fashion because the whole idea was you can, make the optics work in your favor because if you get that corset tight enough, you can have that tiny waist. And then the rest of it is left to the imagination because with a big enough hoop, you could have anything under there and people wouldn't know. And, in some of the writing of the day, women actually said that kind of thing. Yeah, they were very kind of, open about it. They had to have their hoops. Now, the nurses in the Sanitary Commission were not allowed to wear a hoop because it was, that was too frivolous. And, you were there to nurse soldiers and, you couldn't have like a giant hoop. There's just no way. So they were allowed one petticoat and that was it.
Well, I am looking for some questions from y'all. I'd love to hear any questions that the crowd might have because I've put out a lot to think about here.
Martha, I am fascinated by truth and fiction. Did Jenna actually try to write a handbook for nurses that was then lifted by the doctor?
Oh, you've read it already.
Yes, I'm better than halfway through. So
Georgia. Okay.
Georgie, not Gemma.
No, I don't know what to tell you that's not a spoiler.
Oh, okay. Don't.
Okay. But no, the doctor didn't. I just tried to make that doctor really mean, but that specific thing did not happen. But I just thought, what if, I just needed something really bad to happen. But you'll see at the end, I tell you all the things that are real in it and what really happened with Georgie and her life.
Right.
I think you'll be happy. It's very close to what happens in the book.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. It's fun to talk to people that are actively reading it right now.
Anyone else?
I have a question. I would love to know what was your inspiration for Lebaron and Jabal, because I hated both of them so much with their
I'm
how
so glad.
did you create their evilness?
I knew someone named LeBaron Carruthers, and I hope he doesn't read the book because I'll be in big trouble. But I just have always loved that name. I mean, isn't that such a great name for an overseer? Jubal Smalls. In my family, they all, joke about Jubal Smalls and how horrible he was. But he again was a copperhead. He's from Louisiana, and here he is in the North, and he really loved real estate. That was his problem. Not so much the ladies, but he wanted to own all these beautiful properties. And that's his downfall. He's just a bad guy. He gets Anne May hooked on snuff. He's married. He should not be doing that. He's mean to his own enslaved people. I just think he's overall a bad guy and takes advantage of her. And she's a relatively smart person. She should have known. But I think we all get into that. We want to believe she was not in love with her husband, Fergus, and don't want to give too many spoilers about that, but yeah, I think that Jubal was a bad guy. Now, I did a lot of research on overseers and the beginnings of the Ku Klux Klan, and that's basically what LeBaron and his patty rollers are. The slaves called them patty rollers because that's what they called themselves the patrollers, but to the slaves, it sounded like patty roller. And I don't know if the hoods that the Ku Klux Klan wears, it came from, in the early days, these patrollers would dress up and in these crazy wild costumes with hoods and try and ride in and scare the enslaved people because they thought that the enslaved people had lower intelligence and could be scared very easily. Well, if you're a slave and someone comes riding in, no matter what they look like, you're going to be afraid. So I found that whole thing very interesting. They made themselves tin badges and things. So I'm glad that you hated him, because really LeBaron Carruthers had no redeeming qualities. And I also really wanted to make clear that Gemma had no power in that relationship, because he really wants her, sexually. And she, let's face it, had no, there was nothing she could do about it. But I don't want to tell you what happens with that relationship, but it reminded me, I read this book called Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, and it was written by Harriet Jacobs. And this was such a good book. It's a great companion book to Sunflower Sisters, because Harriet was enslaved in North Carolina, and she was owned by a young girl. And the girl's brother-in-law was a doctor and was madly in love with Harriet. Harriet was very beautiful. And he constantly badgered her. He built a house in the woods, just like LeBaron does in this book. And he wanted to make her kind of his love slave in that house. And Harriet had 2 young children. Her husband had been sold, and she was not going to let that happen to herself. So she hid in her aunt's house in a coffin-sized room. She could barely turn around in it for 2 years, and watched her children go off to school every morning, having been told that their mother abandoned them. And so she couldn't tell anyone she was there. And in the end, I mean, it's kind of a happy ending, but it reads like a novel. And once I read that, I just thought, I need to make LeBaron a similar kind of predator that, because that must have been a really terrifying thing. But I'm glad you hated them because they deserve to be hated.
Anita, I think you had a question.
Yeah, well, a comment first, which was, you talked about a favorite line you had in the book, Alice, and my favorite one, I'm on about page 350 now, was when Sally says to Gemma, remember, you may not be of my body, but you're of my heart. It almost makes me have tears in my eyes.
I know, me too. You're making me cry too, Anita. I know, isn't,
What a great relationship.
you
But
don't
I-
have to be a blood relative. And an interesting story, you'll read in the author's note, Anita, but if you ever go to the Bellamy Faraday house, which I hope you all get a chance to do that, it's such a
Definitely
wonderful
want to.
trip. You can go through the woods over the stile that they talk about in the book. And a stile is I didn't know this, it's a little bridge that goes over a stone wall. And if you walk through the woods, you'll come to the old Bethlehem Cemetery. And all the fancy people, Reverend Bellamy is buried there. Caroline is not. She's buried down with her family in Long Island. But I was always so kind of saddened that there was one grave in that cemetery that was apart from all the white graves. And the name on the grave is Sally Smith. And I always thought, I want to kind of immortalize her. And that's what I did. That's where Sally Smith came from. So you'll see in the book. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but just so you know, if you ever go there, you might be interested to see where the character Sally Smith's inspiration came from.
I definitely want to go there. I also had a question. I apologize if you talked about it earlier because I came a bit late, but I love all the tiny details that you've put in the book. And two of my favorites were parlor skates and also the cat carrier that Anne May gets from her brother. And I wondered if you just, did you happen to come across that somewhere and say, oh, I have to get that in the book? It's so weird. I mean,
that's exactly right. Well, I read all these. I spend my days reading, the crazy lady Godey's, that was like
book,
the vogue of the time. Read that and Harper's Weekly, and because I love just like getting all the language. But anytime I come across something like that, I have these hundreds of legal pads that I just like write stuff down on. And so once I'm done doing all that research, it's fun when I have the actual. I was going to show you my outline. It's crazy. When I have the outline done with all the scenes in it and I get my first draft, then I can take all these things from my pads, like the parlor skates, and kind of feather them in. And that is the most fun part. But yes, the cat carrier was very big in France at the time. And they actually carried the cat on their back, on the back part of their skirt. And the parlor skates, for sure. I saw an ad for those. And the parlor skates were big. And, now we'd be like, what? It's like you're rollerblading inside, but it helped them, if they were, doing work in the house, it helped them, kind of glide from one room to the other. And it was just fun, I think. I'm glad you like that though, Anita. That makes me feel like there's someone out there that's appreciating that. So that's good.
Anyone else? I don't see all the pages. So anyone else with a question?
I would like to hear about where Anne May came from. Boy, I hated her. I hated her more than Jubal.
Really?
I despised her. Every time she came up, I just wanted to throw something.
Why did you not like her?
Gee, I wonder. I don't know. She was just pure evil. You talk about not having a redeeming quality. She didn't have a single one.
Yeah,
Like really
right.
nothing. I've met a lot of really awful people. I've never met anyone that awful.
Really? Well, she was nice to her cat.
Well, I'm a dog person, so that doesn't count for anything.
So that doesn't count.
That doesn't buy her any favor.
And she was nice to her brother, Harry.
Was she nice to him, or was she just
Yeah, you're
that?
right, Mary. Okay, you're right. Well, here's the
I mean,
thing.
where did she come from?
When you meet her mother, Zaretha, I think you go, oh, okay, yeah, that's bad. She had her father was murdered in a slave uprising. They had to wrap him up in the rug, and it ruined the rug. She was upset about that. But I think there are people in the world that are just not good people, and I think she was one of them. And she also, her mother reveals that father was not her father. So,
Yeah.
it's complicated, let's put it that way. But in terms of where she came from in my brain, people sometimes go, like with Herta Oberhauser, I don't know if you read Lilac Girls, but Herta Oberhauser was pretty bad too. She operated on young girls, maybe not as bad as Anne May in terms of the physicality of it, because Anne May whips Gemma so horribly. But, people used to ask me, is it really hard to write about Herta Oberhauser from her point of view? That must be so terrible. And I just was like, I wish I could say that it was, but, I just access kind of the darker parts of myself. And that's what I did with Anne May too. It's kind of fun. I think that's what Alice can probably attest to this. It's like acting in a way, you have to become that person. And becoming Anne May for a little while, frankly, was actually more interesting than anything. You access your awfulness, and it's kind of interesting to do that. But yeah, I agree with you. She was pretty bad. I felt kind of more sorry for her sometimes, though. What happens to her? We can't talk about what happens to her, but she got caught up in the whole Jubal stuff. She was, I don't know. I had to kind of.
Was she inspired by anyone, or did you just made her up out of whole cloth?
Oh, you mean, did she come from, I read this amazing book.
Well, or pieces of people, or.
I read this amazing book, and it's called Within the Plantation Household, Black and White Women of the Old South. This has a lot of good stuff in it. I really felt like, I learned a lot in here, because, I was really curious, how could this happen? Just like with Herta Oberhauser, how could she operate on young girls? She had been steeped in National Socialism. And so, that kind of was her thing that was happening. And with Anne May, I feel like she was just brought up to feel like, enslaved people were just not really human. And I think, that she drank the Kool-Aid on that one. So I just wanted to be brutal about it. I didn't want to make her too nice. And it sounds like, Sherry, that it worked.
It totally worked.
My agent, by the way, that was her favorite chapters.
Yeah, what does that say about her? I don't even want to know.
Well, we'll talk next time there's an event at Birds. We'll get together and talk about that. But no, I think, a lot of people sent me emails and letters about Herta Oberhauser that they really enjoyed her chapters too. I think people like kind of delving into the dark side of things. And I was curious, how could you be a plantation mistress and wake up every morning and look at yourself? You have to tell yourself a lot of lies, and she sure did.
Yeah, she was a good one.
Okay.
Other questions?
I just wanted to chime in on that. Also, I thought you did a great job with Herta Oberhauser, and I also think that you did a great job with Anne May, because I felt that little bit of sorry for her, just because she was so easy to manipulate by her mother, by her stepdaddy. Oh my God, by and her, well, by Jubal, of course, but her brother was the only one. That's what redeemed her for me, is her brother saying to her, see, you're not all bad, like there is good in you, like he could see it, nobody else could, including us.
I can tell, looking at Sherry's face, that she's not buying it.
Oh no, she doesn't buy that.
I agree with you, Anita. I agree with you.
Anita is much nicer than me. I lose my Canadian card all the time. Yeah.
Well, that's what is so wonderful about reading. It's like everyone has kind of a different take on it. My agent loved her, and Sherry hated her, and Anita's kind of like where I am. I think also to write the character, you have to like them, no matter how horrible they are. You have to, like with Herta, I had to show, a nicer side of her, because otherwise it's cliche, and it's nothing's black and white. So I'm glad this is the most fun I've had in a discussion for this book, because I love talking about the nuances of it and how readers, they have different takes on it. So
That is so nice of you to say. And a lot of the people chiming in are people that I talk to about books all the time. And that's part of either our book groups or just store chatter or whatever. I mean, I find that that one of the things I love about somebody like an Anne May is that I didn't want to, but I was capable of sympathizing with someone who was so inherently either evil or stupid or both, that, and these are not attributes I admire.
Right.
But I could understand it. And that speaks to your writing, Martha. I mean, that speaks to you getting inside the head of somebody that is, that you just did a deep dive on. And it's just, it really brings it forward so that Sherry can have a discussion with you about how little she liked it, and Anita can talk about understanding it and not necessarily sympathizing with it, but understand. I mean, that speaks well to fleshed out characters that are so well done. So
thank
pat
you.
yourself on the back for that one. I mean,
I want to know from Sherry what she thought of Euphemia, the sister, and Aunt May's relationship.
Wait, did you finish the book?
I did.
Okay.
I did. I was very happy at the twist at the end.
Oh yeah, we can't talk about that.
No,
Yeah.
no spoilers. No.
But did you feel like she was nice to her sister?
Was Euphemia nice to Anne May, or the other way around?
Was Anne May nice to Euphemia?
No.
But what about when they go to the church fair?
When she tries to hook her up with somebody so she can get rid of her?
She's hooking her up with her husband because she wants to get rid of her husband.
Yeah.
No, she had no idea that was coming.
Yeah, no, she was trying to set her up so she could like get rid of her, right? She just wanted to be rid of her.
Well, yes, actually, you're right. Now that I think about it, you're right. She was trying to go like, I can't take care of you forever.
Right. Yeah. Somebody else, right?
It kind of backfired on her a little bit.
Kind of did.
Yeah.
Martha, I think you're too invested in the character. Not necessarily that you like, but you've created them. You can't let them go. Wait a minute. So I think the word isn't like, the word is invested.
You're right. And, I guess I have to stick up for them because I feel like no one else will, especially when you're Aunt May. But yeah, I gave birth to them now that I think about it. But you're right, Lori.
Yeah.
I'm biased.
Well, the Woolsey Faraday family are sort of the linchpin of what holds all of these three books together. But the interesting other characters that we satellite around with the Anne Mays and the Gemmas are equally as developed and fleshed out, which I find is a great balance, particularly in this book, because you learn a lot about the Faradays from the history part, but you learn about the other two characters bring the history. They bring the balance. And so, I mean, I loved, as sad as Gemma's life can be because she's a slave, and the whole history of slavery and Reconstruction and the issues of reparations. All of those are very current discussions right now. Did you have a sense that was going to come to a national platform at some point, or
no
I mean,
no
it is
way.
right in the middle of the
this
discussion.
It's so weird. No, I mean, the same thing was true with Lilac Girls a little bit, that National Socialism, nationalism came to be such a big part of the discussion these days. But no, I finished this book a few years ago and I had no idea that any of this was happening. But I did see the disparity though, but just like I did with Lilac Girls, I did see the gulf that existed then, and even 2 years ago, the gulf was just this yawning abyss. And it feels like the whole time I was reading, I just kept going, oh my God, that's just like today. Like when the draft riots happened in New York City, like when the insurrection happened at the Capitol, I went, oh my God, it's the draft riots again. It wasn't, I mean, the draft riots was 4 days long, and it was, an Irish mob that was angry that they couldn't pay their way out of having to, serve in the army. And the formerly enslaved, the free Black people were taking their jobs. And so they were, practically burning New York City down and lynching Black people. They hung 4 Black men and a child. So, so having kind of freshly come off of the Civil War, I just kept going, oh my God, that's the same. Yeah.
And that's made it, I read about that riot and I ended up following up in the history books with it because I had trouble finding out about it. And it was a huge, big deal. And I don't remember hearing that history growing up. I might have.
Oh, really?
I don't remember hearing that history.
I never
Um,
heard that history.
Really?
No,
And it is a
and yet-
huge
and
big
yet-
deal.
I really felt that was the voice in my head was saying, oh my God, this is like the Vietnam demonstrations when they had the lottery, and this is history repeating itself over and over and over. When do we get it right?
That is the question. When do we get it right? I don't know. Hopefully, but you know what? That's why it's so important to have these discussions and to not shy away from the horror of it. And I think that, it's important to show the bad parts of it so that we all go, okay, let's make sure that doesn't happen again.
Any other questions out there?
I don't want to interrupt the discussion of this book, but before you go, Martha, last time when you were at the library, you talked about writing a mystery. And I'm a mystery junkie.
I was going to get there, Sherry.
I
so
love these books, but I'm a mystery junkie. So before you leave, I would like to hear a little bit more about that.
Sherry wants details.
I do.
Oh, Sherry.
I
right
I want the mystery book. You don't have to interrupt talking about this one.
Oh no,
but I just
it was
on
on my list of questions. That's
I always try. I love mysteries too. My mom, before she died, was, oh my God, she had piles of mystery books. And I think it does something to your brain. It like makes your brain feel good for some reason. So I always try to put some like that invisible thread of a mystery in all my books. But yeah, my next 2 books are very different. I have a whole wall of characters that are in the next book is a Cold War book. And it kind of takes up where Lilac Girls left off a little bit. I don't know if you know about Operation Paperclip, which was a lot of the Nazis that should have been executed after the war came to the United States to work in our atomic bomb program and the space program. And in my book, there are 2 characters, one American, one French girl that survive Ravensbrück and some really bad things that a doctor did to them there. And they hunt him down across the world. And it is a mystery that is all about who is this doctor and how do they find him? And it's very exciting. So it's called The Golden Doves so far. That's the title, my working title. And then the one after that is the thriller. And it takes place in my house here. It's supposed to be Massachusetts, but it's thinly veiled Connecticut. And I live, in a house on a hay farm, and it's kind of, my husband keeps getting mad at me for talking about it because I've scared myself so badly writing this that he says we're gonna have to move because I don't know. When you write about your own house, I guess that's not smart, but yeah, it's called The Girl on Windy Hill, and it's I don't know if my agent keeps saying it's a suspense novel, and I don't really know how that's different from a thriller, but it's more of a mystery. There's a kind of a subplot about opioids and it's one character. So it's the first time I've written from one point of view. And I think you'll be surprised at the end. It's one of those like who did it kind of things. And I hope you'll be surprised. Yeah, there's a lot. The more I write, the more I like these last two books that I'm writing, or the latest two books. I really love like to ramp up the suspense and the mystery in it, because that's what I love. And now that it's not pure historical fiction about Caroline's family, I have a little more latitude to do that, and it's really, really fun, especially the latest, The Girl on Windy Hill, contemporary novel. I don't have to look up, where, what carriage did they drive? I can just kind of go for it. So it's really fun. I think you'll like it, Sherry.
Time frame for when are we looking for those?
Good question. My editor is reading, the Cold War book right now. So the hard thing is, I'm on a hardcover paperback thing. So the hardcover came out in March, and the paperback's going to come out in 2022. And then I guess 2023 is when this book will come out. I hope sooner. We've been in discussions about how to ramp things, how to make it quicker, because I go out on book tour, and like one woman took my phone and said, in Oklahoma, she said, "Can I have your phone?" And she did a selfie video and said, "I want you to give this to your editor." And she said, "Hi, Kara, I just want you to know that I'm old and I'm going to die soon. And if this book doesn't come out before I pass away, then I'm really going to be sorry. So could you speed it up?" So I agree. I mean, I want to, to have them come out quicker. So I'm going to do the best I can. But in the meantime, if you go on Pinterest, as I'm writing all of my books, I share pictures on Pinterest. So there's the Cold War book, I think, is up there now. So it's kind of fun just to kind of get a little peek at what's going on. But I'm going as fast as I possibly can.
They both sound great. Thanks for asking, Sherry.
Yes, thanks, Sherry. Oh, I hope I get to come back again for the next book, because we really had a good
well,
discussion.
you will be invited. That's not a problem.
Oh,
We love
good.
your books, Martha. We love your books.
Maybe we can do an in-person by then. That would really be fun.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yes.
We're all waiting for that.
Yeah.
Getting rather wistful thinking of it.
I know.
Any other questions, folks?
Well, thank you so much. I've had a blast.
I have had a blast too, and it's such an honor to host you, Martha. It's just been such a great experience. The books are absolutely wonderful. I'm so grateful that you had a chance to come down and sign them. I mean, these are real signatures. It's not a book plate. So it's one of the things, I mean, it's real signatures, and that's it in this day and age it's a huge big deal. But your friendship to our group, and your willingness to squeeze us into a really busy schedule was just so flattering and wonderful and thoughtful.
I mean,
thank you.
Come on, it's you, Alice. So
it's you,
it really, and you have the most amazing community. Honestly, I'm not kidding. This has been such, it's so nice to just feel like you can talk about things. That's what I miss the most about, COVID is just being able to hang out and talk. And I feel like we really got to do that. So thank you.
Well, it'll be a new normal, but we'll get there. And in case you all haven't noticed behind me, above my hand,
I have a shelf. I'm so excited.
Martha has a shelf.
Lori's going, yay.
For those of you who have not had a chance to either dive in or read this book, you're in for a serious treat. Also, please go out on Goodreads or any platform that you use and either give it stars or write a review. It always helps for an author to have a little bit of a sense of how you feel about it, or like somebody else's review. It's always that's a connection that you can make to an author also.
Oh, that's huge. Yeah.
Please do not forget to go to marthahallkelly.com and see all the backstory. I don't think that, by the way, I don't believe that your questions PDF link, I think, is broken. So you may want to
in the book club one.
In the book club one. So
Thank
these
you for-
questions came from us.
Thank
We
you for telling
We
me.
didn't pirate any of your questions, so.
That's why they were good.
No, we
So,
tried.
not
So,
that the Random House ones are bad, but
nope, it's
um,
okay. Always nice to see what other people come up with, but we,
so
you know,
that
your
link
book
is
is,
broken. Okay, I better put that on my list. Thank you so much. So hopefully I'll see you again soon.
see you again soon. And thank you all for coming. It was a rare treat to see your shiny faces and even read your little names there. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. We have plenty of signed books left. So drop on
Thank you,
in.
Martha. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you
Thank
both.
Thank you,
Yes,
everyone.
thank
You were
you.
amazing.
Thank you,
for
Martha.
your
Thank you for
questions.
writing it and letting and sharing it with us.
Yes.
Oh, I'll see you soon.
Yes, you will.
Bye.
Bye-bye.